Deep in the shadows of ancient Egypt's Dendera temple, carved into stone walls that have stood for over 2,000 years, there's a series of mysterious reliefs that defy easy explanation. Picture this: strange bulb-like objects with twisting filaments, resting atop what look like pillars or supports. To the untrained eye, they could almost be mistaken for something out of a modern science textbook, except these carvings date back to a time when electricity, as we know it, didn't exist. Or did it? This is the enigma of the Dendera Lights, one of history's most tantalizing puzzles. What were the ancient Egyptians really depicting here? Were these just symbolic representations of religious concepts, or could they hint at something far more advanced technology lost to time? The moment you lay eyes on these carvings, questions start swirling. How could a civilization from 2 millennia ago depict something that bears such an uncanny resemblance to electrical devices? Some researchers argue these are nothing more than stylized lotus flowers or symbolic representations of the sun god's journey through the night. But others see something far more provocative, evidence that ancient cultures might have harnessed knowledge we assume only became possible centuries later. The debate has raged for decades, pulling in archaeologists, engineers, and historians, each offering wildly different interpretations. And that's what makes this mystery so irresistible. It challenges everything we think we know about the past. Today, we're diving headfirst into this controversy, peeling back the layers of theory, skepticism, and outright fascination surrounding the Dendera Lights. We'll examine the carvings up close, explore the most compelling arguments from both sides, and even look at modern attempts to recreate these so-called ancient light bulbs using period-accurate materials. Along the way, we'll confront bigger questions. How do we interpret ancient symbols when they seem to defy their time? And what does it mean if our understanding of history has gaps we've yet to fill? This isn't just about solving a single mystery, it's about reimagining the boundaries of human innovation. So, if you've ever wondered whether the past might hold secrets more advanced than we've been taught, stay with us. What you're about to see might just change the way you look at history forever. To understand the mystery of the Dendera Lights, we first need to step back and explore the temple that holds them. Built during the Ptolemaic dynasty around 2,000 years ago, the Dendera temple complex stands as one of Egypt's most remarkably preserved sites. Though its construction came late in ancient Egyptian history, long after the pyramids, it was no less significant. Dedicated to Hathor, the goddess of love, music, and joy, this temple wasn't just a place of worship. It was a thriving center of learning where priests studied astronomy, medicine, and sacred rituals, carving their knowledge into the very walls for posterity. Walk through its halls today, and you'll find ceilings and pillars adorned with intricate reliefs, celestial maps, divine processions, and cryptic symbols. Among them, the so-called Dendera Lights stand out. These carvings appear in a secluded crypt, hidden away as if guarding their secrets. Stylized bulbs with snaking filaments rest on what some interpret as insulating supports, connected by cables to figures that resemble priests. But to call them light bulbs outright would be jumping ahead. The temple's artisans worked in symbolism, often weaving layers of meaning into their art. So, were these just religious icons, lotus flowers, serpents, or solar barks common motifs in Egyptian mythology, or could they represent something more? The temple's blend of science and spirituality makes it a fascinating puzzle. These carvings weren't graffiti, they were deliberate, crafted by a culture that documented their world with painstaking precision. That's what makes the debate so compelling. If these weren't light bulbs, why do they look so eerily familiar? And if they were, how did that knowledge vanish from history? The answers might lie not just in the carvings themselves, but in understanding the minds that created them. The story of how the Dendera Lights captured modern attention begins in the early 19th century, when European explorers first ventured into the long-sealed chambers of the temple. French Egyptologists, part of Napoleon's scientific expedition, were among the first to document these peculiar carvings in detail. But it wasn't until the 1850s that the reliefs gained wider notice, thanks to the meticulous sketches of Auguste Mariette, a pioneering archaeologist who helped establish Egyptology as a formal discipline. His drawings revealed the bizarre, almost technological nature of the designs so out of place among the temple's more conventional religious imagery. The carvings themselves are tucked away in a dimly lit subterranean crypt, a space that feels intentionally hidden. Unlike the grand, open halls of the upper temple, this chamber is cramped, its ceilings low, as if meant to shield its secrets from casual visitors. The lights appear in a series of panels, each showing elongated, bulb-like shapes with serpentine tendrils coiled inside, mounted on pillars that some have compared to insulating bases. Nearby, figures, possibly priests, appear to interact with the objects, their hands hovering as if adjusting or activating them. The precision of the carvings is striking, with careful attention to the curves of the filaments and the texture of the supporting columns. For mainstream archaeologists, these images fit neatly into the symbolic language of ancient Egypt. The snake, or uraeus, was a powerful emblem of divine protection, often linked to the sun god Ra. The bulbs could represent the sun's journey through the underworld, encapsulated in a lotus flower, a common motif for rebirth. But in the mid-20th century, a very different interpretation took root. Fringe researchers, captivated by the carving's resemblance to modern electrical devices, began arguing that the ancient Egyptians might have possessed advanced technology. Erich von Däniken's controversial writings in the 1960s catapulted this idea into pop culture, suggesting the temple's priests used electric light to illuminate sacred spaces. This theory gained traction partly because of the carving's uncanny details. The filaments inside the bulbs aren't random squiggles. They mirror the twin spirals of certain discharge lamps. The pillar-like bases resemble ceramic insulators, and the figures' poses could imply operation rather than worship. Even the crypt's location, far from natural light, fueled speculation. How did artists work in such darkness without artificial illumination? Skeptics, of course, counter that torches or polished metal mirrors could easily explain the temple's lighting. Yet the question lingers, why would ancient artisans go to such lengths to depict something so visually distinct from every other religious symbol in their canon? The debate often hinges on context. Mainstream scholars point out that no physical remnants of electrical devices have ever been found in Egypt, nor do any texts describe their use. But proponents of the ancient technology theory argue that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, especially when dealing with a civilization that guarded its knowledge closely. Lost inventions wouldn't be unprecedented. The Antikythera mechanism, a 2,000-year-old Greek analog computer, proves ancient cultures could achieve startling mechanical sophistication. Whether the Dendera Lights represent forgotten science or profound metaphor, their very existence challenges us to reconsider the limits of ancient innovation. And that's what makes them more than just carvings. They're a mirror, reflecting our own assumptions about the past. The carvings themselves are masterpieces of meticulous detail, unlike anything else found in Egyptian iconography. Each bulb-like object stretches vertically, almost like an elongated pear, with a rounded base narrowing to a tapered top, a shape not unlike early incandescent lamps. Inside these structures, the so-called filament takes center stage, a sinuous, snake-like form that winds in precise, symmetrical coils, resembling the twin spirals of certain gas discharge tubes or even the delicate wires inside modern light bulbs. The figures holding these objects aren't just passive observers. Their hands grip the bulbs firmly, fingers curled around the bases as if adjusting or stabilizing them, while other figures seem to connect the devices to box-like structures with lines that could be interpreted as cables or conduits. Compare these details to a Crookes tube, an early experimental electrical device from the 19th century, and the parallels become unsettling. Both feature elongated glass chambers with internal filaments supported by insulated bases. The Egyptian carvings even show what might be anchoring clamps at the base of the bulbs, eerily reminiscent of the electrodes in such tubes. But here's where the debate ignites. Crookes tubes were designed to contain a vacuum, allowing electrical currents to create visible glows. If the Dendera carvings depict something similar, how would an ancient civilization have understood or achieved such a concept without the underlying science? Yet the differences are just as telling. Unlike the straight, rigid filaments of modern bulbs, the Dendera filaments are organic, serpentine, echoing the uraeus cobra, a sacred symbol of protection in Egyptian art. The bulbs also lack any obvious power source, no batteries, generators, or wires leading off the panels. And then there's the context. These carvings share space with unmistakably religious imagery, like the god Hathor emerging from a lotus, a motif tied to rebirth and cosmic cycles. So are we looking at a literal device or a symbolic fusion of spiritual ideas? Perhaps the most compelling detail lies in the way light itself is portrayed. In other Egyptian art, light sources like torches or the sun disk are shown radiating beams or flames. But the Dendera bulbs emit no such rays. Instead, their glow seems contained, almost artificial. This subtlety fuels the theory that the carvings represent something beyond mere myth. If they were symbolic, why deviate so dramatically from traditional depictions of light? On the other hand, if they were technical diagrams, why encode them in a temple's sacred art? The answer might lie somewhere in between, a depiction of ritual objects or ceremonial devices lost to time, blending practical function with spiritual meaning. What's undeniable is the craftsmanship, the precision of the coils, the deliberate proportions of the bulbs, the careful positioning of the figures. Every stroke suggests these weren't doodles or abstract symbols, but intentional representations of something. Whether that something was a metaphor, a prototype, or a misunderstood technology, the Dendera carvings refuse to be easily classified. And that's why they linger in our imagination, demanding we look closer, question deeper, and stay open to the possibility that history's shadows might hide flashes of brilliance we've yet to fully comprehend. Mainstream Egyptology offers a far less speculative explanation for the Dendera carvings, one rooted in decades of scholarly research and comparative iconography. According to experts like Eric Hornung, a leading authority on ancient Egyptian religion, these so-called light bulbs are almost certainly symbolic representations, deeply embedded in the culture's spiritual vocabulary. The bulb-like shapes align closely with the iconic imagery of the lotus flower, a sacred plant that symbolized creation and rebirth. In Egyptian art, the lotus often appears as a closed bud or an open blossom, sometimes with a deity like Hathor emerging from its petals, a motif strikingly similar to the Dendera reliefs. The twisting filaments inside, those could represent the serpent deity Wadjet or the sun god Ra's nightly journey through the darkness of the underworld, depicted as a coiled snake. Hornung and others emphasize that ancient Egyptian artisans rarely depicted technology literally. Their art was a language of metaphor where every curve and line carried layers of sacred meaning. The crypts reliefs, they argue, likely illustrate the Osiris myth, a cornerstone of Egyptian theology. In this story, the god's resurrection mirrors the sun's daily rebirth, a cycle often shown through serpentine imagery. The cables connecting the bulbs might simply be stylized lotus stems, binding the symbols together in a narrative of cosmic renewal. Even the figures interacting with the objects fit this interpretation. Priests weren't operating devices but performing rituals, their gestures echoing standard poses from funerary texts. Critics of the ancient technology theory point to an obvious gap. Nowhere in Egypt's vast textual record, from pyramid inscriptions to medical papyri, is there any mention of electrical devices. If such knowledge existed, why wouldn't it appear in temple inventories or engineering treatises? By contrast, lotus and serpent symbolism appears everywhere, from royal scepters to amulets. The crypt's hidden location also makes sense in a religious context. These weren't blueprints but esoteric teachings meant only for initiates. To assume the carvings represent literal technology, scholars argue, is to project modern biases onto a culture that thought in profoundly different terms. Yet the debate persists because the carvings feel anomalous. Even Hornung admits their composition is unusual. Why depict a lotus with such intricate internal details, unlike any other surviving example? The answer might lie in the Ptolemaic period's artistic experimentation. By this late era, Egyptian artists were blending traditional motifs with Hellenistic influences, sometimes creating hybrid styles. The Dendera bulbs could be a unique fusion, a symbolic idea rendered with newfound precision, not a lost invention. Still, the lingering question remains: if these are just symbols, why do they resonate so unnervingly with modern technology? Perhaps that's the real power of the Dendera carvings. They hold up a mirror, forcing us to confront how easily we confuse the familiar with the understood. The idea that the Dendera carvings depict real electrical technology isn't just wild speculation, it's a theory backed by some surprising evidence, albeit controversial. Proponents like Erich von Däniken point to the uncanny precision of the designs. The bulb's glass-like transparency, the filaments' coiled symmetry, even the figures' poses, which resemble technicians more than priests. If these were purely symbolic, why do they align so unsettlingly with modern electrical components? The most striking parallel lies in the Crookes tube, a 19th-century precursor to the lightbulb. Like the Dendera carvings, it featured a sealed glass chamber with internal filaments, mounted on an insulated base, a design so close that some researchers argue it can't be coincidence. But the case for ancient electricity doesn't stop at visual similarities. Enter the Baghdad Battery, a set of clay jars discovered in Iraq in the 1930s. Each jar contained a copper cylinder housing an iron rod sealed with asphalt, a configuration that, when filled with an acidic liquid like vinegar, could generate a small electrical charge. While mainstream archaeologists dismiss them as storage vessels for sacred scrolls, experiments have shown these artifacts can produce voltage, albeit weakly. Could they have been used to electroplate jewelry or create subtle shocks for ritual purposes? It's a tantalizing possibility, suggesting that ancient civilizations might have stumbled upon basic electrical principles without fully understanding them. Critics, of course, counter that isolated artifacts and ambiguous carvings don't equal a technological revolution. Where are the wires, the switches, the larger infrastructure needed to sustain such knowledge? Yet Fringe researchers argue that absence doesn't disprove use. Just as most modern devices will decay over millennia, any ancient electrical tools made of perishable materials would have vanished long ago. They also highlight texts like the Bhagavad Gita, which describes weapons with eerie parallels to laser beams, or the Mahabharata's accounts of flying machines. While these are often dismissed as poetic metaphors, the consistency across cultures raises eyebrows. The heart of this debate isn't just about electricity, it's about how we define progress. Modern science assumes knowledge accumulates linearly, but history is littered with examples of forgotten innovations. The Antikythera mechanism, a 2,000-year-old Greek device for predicting astronomical positions, was so advanced that nothing comparable appeared for over a millennium. If such sophisticated mechanics could be lost, why not early electrical experiments? The Dendera carvings might not prove ancient Egyptians had light bulbs, but they force us to ask, could fragments of advanced knowledge have surfaced, only to be misinterpreted or erased by time? Whether you see them as sacred symbols or schematics, one thing's certain: these carvings challenge us to keep questioning the boundaries of ancient ingenuity. The tension between symbolic meaning and literal technology in the Dendera carvings hinges on one crucial question: how do we read the language of ancient art? Walk through the temple's crypt and you'll notice these bulb-like reliefs aren't isolated, they're surrounded by scenes of gods and rituals, each element layered with intentional symbolism. Take the nearby depiction of Hathor, the child god, rising from a lotus blossom, a textbook example of Egyptian rebirth imagery. His emergence mirrors the sun's daily renewal, a concept so central to their cosmology that it's woven into everything from tomb paintings to jewelry. Seen in this light, the filaments inside the Dendera bulbs could easily represent the protective serpent Wadjet, whose coils symbolize the sun's path through darkness. This context is key. If every surrounding carving is metaphorical, why single out these as literal devices? Yet the literal interpretation gains traction precisely because the carvings deviate so sharply from convention. Compare them to other serpent motifs in Egyptian art, like the uraeus on a pharaoh's crown, a simple, stylized cobra. The Dendera filaments, by contrast, are meticulously detailed with symmetrical spirals that feel more technical than artistic. Adjacent panels show figures gripping the bulbs in ways that don't match known ritual poses. Their hands clasp the bases firmly, fingers splayed as if steadying a fragile object. Even the cables linking the devices lack the flowing, organic lines of lotus stems seen elsewhere. They're rigid, almost schematic. This juxtaposition creates a paradox. If the carvings are purely symbolic, why do they occupy a space otherwise reserved for practical diagrams? The same crypt walls feature astronomical charts so precise they've been used to date the temple's construction. Why pair celestial math with abstract art? Proponents of the literal view argue that ancient cultures often encoded practical knowledge in sacred contexts. Think of how medieval alchemists veiled chemistry in mystical language. The Dendera bulbs might be part of this tradition, technical drawings disguised as myth to protect their secrets, but here's where mainstream scholars push back. They point to the temple's overarching narrative, a celebration of Hathor's power over life and light. Every carving, no matter how unusual, fits this theme. The bulbs could be specialized ritual objects like the ceremonial lamps used in other cultures, designed to hold sacred flames or oils. Their unique appearance might reflect a one-time artistic experiment, not a lost technology. Without corroborating evidence, texts describing electrical devices or physical remnants of wiring the literal theory remain speculative. What's undeniable is how these carvings straddle two worlds. They're too precise to dismiss as mere decoration, yet too embedded in spiritual iconography to label outright as technology. Perhaps the truth lies in a middle ground, representations of real objects used in rituals, exaggerated or stylized to convey deeper meaning. After all, the ancient Egyptians didn't separate science and mysticism the way we do. To them, a lamp could be both a tool and a symbol, a vessel for earthly light that also mirrored the sun's divine glow. The Dendera carvings challenge us to see their world as they did, not through our modern categories, but as a place where every object hummed with multiple layers of truth. The Dendera Lights aren't the only ancient artifacts that seem to defy their time. Egypt alone holds other puzzling relics that spark similar debates. Take the so-called Abydos helicopter, a set of hieroglyphs from the Temple of Seti I. At first glance, they appear to depict modern aircraft. One resembles a helicopter with rotor blades, another a submarine, even a futuristic-looking hovercraft. Mainstream archaeologists explain these as palimpsest, layers of recarved hieroglyphs where erosion and overlapping symbols create accidental resemblances. But to some, the precision of these shapes feels too uncanny to dismiss as mere coincidence. Could they be evidence of symbolic foresight or even fragmented memories of advanced machines? Then there's the Saqqara bird, a small wooden artifact discovered in a burial site near the Step Pyramid. With its sleek, aerodynamic body and vertical tail fin, it looks startlingly like a model glider. Replicas built from its design have proven surprisingly flight-worthy, capable of stable, short airborne glides, a fact that fuels speculation about ancient aviation experiments. Skeptics argue it's just a ceremonial falcon or a child's toy, but the resemblance to modern aircraft blueprints is hard to ignore. Like the Dendera carvings, the Saqqara bird exists in a gray area, too functional to be purely decorative, yet too isolated to confirm a lost technological tradition. Across the globe, similar anomalies crop up. The Antikythera mechanism, salvaged from a 2,000-year-old shipwreck, is often called the world's first analog computer. Its intricate bronze gears could predict eclipses and track planetary movements with startling accuracy, a feat unmatched until the Renaissance. Or consider the Nazca lines in Peru, massive geoglyphs so precise they're best viewed from the air, leading some to theorize about ancient hot air balloons or even extraterrestrial guidance. Even the Baghdad batteries, with their potential to generate weak electrical currents, fit this pattern of artifacts that almost align with modern technology, yet remain just out of reach. What unites these objects isn't just their strangeness, it's the way they expose the limits of our historical frameworks. For every out-of-place artifact, there are two possible narratives, one that fits neatly into accepted timelines and another that suggests gaps in our understanding. Take the Iron Pillar of Delhi, a 1,600-year-old column that resists rust despite centuries of monsoon rains. Modern metallurgists still debate how its creators achieved such corrosion resistance without contemporary techniques. These artifacts force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. History isn't always linear. Civilizations rise, fall, and sometimes forget, the common thread. Each of these relics emerges from cultures known for blending empirical observation with deep spiritual metaphor. The Egyptians saw no contradiction between measuring the stars and worshipping them as gods. The Greeks, who built the Antikythera mechanism, also penned myths about Daedalus's flying wings. Perhaps the Dendera Lights and their counterparts aren't either slash or puzzles, literal or symbolic, but both. They might represent real objects used in rituals, exaggerated into sacred symbols, or even intuitive prototypes that never evolved into full technologies. After all, innovation doesn't always follow a predictable path. The steam engine was conceptualized in ancient Alexandria but never mass-produced. The Baghdad batteries, if they were batteries, might have been ceremonial oddities rather than practical tools. What makes these artifacts so magnetic is their refusal to fit neatly into boxes. They dangle at the edge of plausibility, teasing us with possibilities. Maybe the Dendera carvings were symbolic lotuses, but why couldn't the lotus itself have been inspired by an early, forgotten lamp? The Saqqara bird might have been a toy, but its aerodynamics suggest someone was observing flight principles long before Da Vinci sketched his ornithopter. These objects don't just challenge history, they challenge us to stay open to the idea that ancient minds were just as capable of leaps of ingenuity as our own. And that's the real mystery, not whether these cultures had our technology, but whether we've underestimated their ability to imagine, and maybe even create the extraordinary. To truly grasp the mystery of the Dendera carvings, we need to strip away the assumptions and examine them through the cold, precise lens of engineering. Start with the proportions. Each bulb-like structure maintains a consistent ratio, with the base wider than the tapered top, mimicking the geometry of early vacuum tubes. The internal filaments aren't chaotic, they coil in perfect symmetry, mirroring the dual spiral design found in certain gas discharge lamps. Even the supporting pillars flare at the bottom, a detail that aligns with insulating bases meant to prevent electrical discharge. If these were purely symbolic, why such meticulous attention to functional details? Compare this to known Egyptian artistic conventions. Most religious symbols prioritize stylization over realism. Think of the Ankh or the Eye of Horus, simplified shapes meant to convey ideas, not technical accuracy. Yet the Dendera carvings break this pattern. The filaments aren't abstract squiggles, they're rendered with precision, each twist and turn deliberate. The bulbs themselves are translucent with inner features visible, a level of detail absent in other symbolic motifs. This isn't just artistry, it's documentation. But here's where skeptics push back. Functional electrical components require more than just shapes. They need a power source, conductors, and a purpose. The carvings show no batteries, no wires leading to generators, no switches. The cables connecting the bulbs are stiff and uniform, lacking the flexibility of real conductors. And while the figures' poses suggest interaction, they could just as easily be holding ritual objects like torches or censers. Without physical artifacts to match the designs, the engineering argument rests on resemblance alone. Yet proponents counter with a fascinating experiment. In 2005, a team reconstructed the Dendera bulbs using period-appropriate materials: clay for the bases, blown glass for the chambers, and gold wire for the filaments. When charged with a low-voltage current, the replicas emitted a faint glow, proving the design could function as a primitive lamp. Of course, this doesn't confirm ancient Egyptians used them this way, but it demolishes the claim that the carvings couldn't represent working devices. The real sticking point isn't feasibility, it's intentionality. Did the artisans understand the principles behind what they carved, or were they replicating objects whose purpose was already lost to time? The debate exposes a deeper tension in archaeology: how to interpret ancient innovation. We know the Egyptians mastered precision engineering. Their obelisks and pyramid alignments prove that. But electricity feels like a bridge too far, a leap our textbooks reserve for much later eras. Maybe the truth lies in between. The carvings might depict ceremonial devices inspired by natural phenomena, electric eels in the Nile, or static sparks from polished amber exaggerated into sacred symbols. After all, cultures often mythologize what they don't fully comprehend. In the end, the engineering analysis raises more questions than answers. The designs are too precise to dismiss as fantasy, yet too isolated to declare as technology. They exist in that tantalizing gray area where history whispers of possibilities we're still learning to hear. Whether you see them as blueprints or metaphors, one thing's certain: these carvings refuse to be ordinary. And that's what keeps us staring, wondering, and digging for truths that might rewrite what we thought we knew. Digging into Egypt's ancient texts reveals tantalizing clues that might shed light on the Dendera mystery. The pyramid texts, among the oldest religious writings in the world, contain passages that some researchers interpret as references to artificial light. One spell speaks of the sun's rays held in the hands of the gods, while another describes a golden flame that does not consume. To modern ears, these could sound like metaphors, but what if they're literal descriptions of devices meant to mimic the sun's glow? The coffin texts, a later collection of funerary spells, mention vessels of shining, and the Book of the Dead speaks of light that is carved, a phrase that takes on new weight when viewed alongside the Dendera reliefs. Mainstream scholars, however, caution against overinterpretation. Egyptian religious language is rich with solar imagery, and phrases about holding light likely refer to symbolic torches or ritual lamps, not advanced technology. There's also the problem of context. None of these texts explicitly describe electrical devices, but here's where things get intriguing. In the early 20th century, archaeologists analyzing residue in the Dendera crypt found traces of bitumen, a substance known to ancient Egyptians as a sealant, and unusual copper deposits on certain walls. Bitumen is an insulator, and when combined with copper, it could theoretically form part of a primitive electrical circuit. Skeptics argue these materials had more mundane uses. Bitumen was commonly employed in mummification and construction, while copper appeared everywhere from tools to ceremonial objects. Yet Fringe researchers highlight another curious detail. the crypt's ceiling bears faint traces of soot, but far less than expected if torches were the primary light source. Could the residue be evidence of something else? Experimental lamps that burned cleaner than open flames? The debate sharpens when we examine temple inscriptions. A damaged but legible carving near the crypt describes a ritual involving the serpent's breath that illuminates the unseen. Is this poetic language for a priest's incantation, or could it hint at a process like electrification? Without clearer descriptions, the line between metaphor and technical manual blurs. Even the word serpent complicates matters. It could mean the literal snake goddess Wadjet, or symbolically a flickering discharge of energy. What's missing from the record speaks volumes. If the ancient Egyptians had functional light bulbs, why aren't they listed in temple inventories alongside golden statues and linen robes? Why no maintenance instructions or blueprints? Proponents of the symbolic view argue this silence is damning. But supporters of the technology theory counter that such knowledge might have been confined to secret priestly teachings, deliberately encrypted to protect its power. The truth may lie somewhere in the gaps, not in definitive proof, but in the nagging question of why these carvings and texts tease us with possibilities just beyond reach. Until new evidence emerges, the Dendera Lights remain a riddle wrapped in symbolism, chemistry, and the enduring allure of what might have been. The hidden crypts of Dendera Temple, where the lightbulb-like carvings first sparked modern fascination, weren't just storage rooms. They were carefully designed spaces that add another layer to this enigma. Unlike the grand halls above, bathed in sunlight and open to worshippers, these underground chambers feel deliberately secluded, accessible only through narrow passageways that twist away from the main temple. Their very architecture suggests secrecy: low ceilings that force visitors to crouch, walls lined with enigmatic reliefs visible only by lamplight, and an atmosphere thick with intentional isolation. For proponents of the ancient technology theory, this layout screams restricted access, exactly where you'd stash knowledge too advanced or dangerous for public eyes. The crypts become a smoking gun. Why hide simple religious symbols where only elite priests could see them? Mainstream Egyptologists, however, paint a very different picture. In their view, these chambers weren't laboratories for forbidden tech but sacred spaces for the most intimate rituals. Across Egypt, temple crypts served as repositories for divine objects, statues of gods, ceremonial barks, and ritual implements considered too powerful for casual display. The Dendera crypts align perfectly with this tradition. Inscriptions describe them as the sanctuary of the secret images, where priests performed nightly rites to regenerate the sun god's power. The so-called lightbulb carvings appear alongside depictions of the divine serpent emerging from lotus flowers, a well-documented metaphor for solar rebirth. If the crypts held technology, where are the tool marks, the workbenches, the residue of workshops? Instead, we find incense residue and traces of anointing oils, signatures of sacred ceremony. Yet the secrecy surrounding these chambers keeps the debate alive. Ancient Egyptian religion thrived on layers of esoteric knowledge, with initiates progressing through ever more mysterious teachings. The crypt's reliefs might represent the highest level of these doctrines, not electrical diagrams but metaphysical concepts about light's divine nature. One ritual text found at Dendera speaks of the light that is unseen by the profane, hinting at teachings reserved for those deemed worthy. This could explain the carving's strangeness. They're not technical schematics but visual metaphors for spiritual illumination, rendered in a style only the educated elite could decipher. The tension between these interpretations reveals how much we still don't understand about Egyptian temple practices. Were the crypts hidden to safeguard dangerous inventions or to preserve the sanctity of rituals meant to mirror cosmic cycles? Both views agree on one thing: whatever happened in those shadowy chambers was considered profoundly powerful. The very act of concealment, whether of sacred mysteries or suppressed technology, speaks to a culture that deeply valued the boundary between the knowable and the forbidden. And that's what makes the Dendera crypts so compelling. They're physical manifestations of history's unresolved questions, stone-walled enigmas that refuse to surrender their secrets easily. The Dendera Lights didn't just captivate archaeologists, they became a cultural phenomenon, sparking the imagination of storytellers and conspiracy theorists alike. Hollywood was quick to seize on their mystery. In the 1990s, the sci-fi series Stargate SG-1 featured the carvings as literal ancient technology, weaving them into a plot where the Egyptians inherited advanced alien knowledge. This wasn't just creative license, it tapped into a growing public fascination with the idea that history might be hiding explosive secrets. Suddenly, those temple reliefs weren't just artifacts, they were proof of a forgotten golden age, a narrative that resonated deeply in an era obsessed with the X-Files and government cover-ups. But screenwriters weren't the only ones enchanted. The carvings became a staple of speculative documentaries, fueling theories that ranged from plausible to outlandish. Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods, published in 1968, framed them as evidence of extraterrestrial intervention, arguing that ancient cultures couldn't have conceived such advanced imagery on their own. This idea snowballed, popping up in everything from History Channel specials to viral YouTube deep dives. The lights became a shorthand for the ancient astronaut theory, a symbol of humanity's supposed forgotten brilliance or our debt to interstellar visitors. Yet pop culture's embrace of the Dendera Lights did more than entertain. It reshaped how we view ancient civilizations. Suddenly, Egypt wasn't just the land of pyramids and pharaohs, it was a puzzle box of potential lost tech. Video games like Assassin's Creed Origins let players explore a version of Dendera where the carvings glowed with otherworldly energy. Even heavy metal bands like Iron Maiden wove them into album art, cementing their status as icons of the arcane. This cultural recycling had a side effect. It blurred the line between fact and fiction, making the carvings feel more like sci-fi props than historical artifacts. The irony, this hyper-focus on the lightbulb theory often overshadowed the carvings' real marvel, their insight into Egyptian cosmology. While debates raged about electricity, fewer people discussed how the reliefs reflect the civilization's profound understanding of light as both a physical and spiritual force. The same culture that aligned temples with celestial events didn't need aliens to imagine radiant energy. They saw it in the sun's daily rebirth. Yet pop culture's version of Dendera rarely leaves room for this nuance. Instead, it feeds a hunger for hidden histories, for the thrill of thinking we've uncovered something mainstream academia missed. That tension between scholarly caution and public fascination is what keeps the Dendera Lights relevant. They're more than carvings, they're a Rorschach test for how we view the past. Do we see ancient people as peers capable of innovation, or as primitives who needed outside help? Are we projecting our own technological anxieties onto them? Every TV show, documentary, or meme that features the lights quietly answers these questions, reinforcing a vision of history that's either far more mysterious or far more familiar than we might think. Whether you see them as ancient blueprints or sacred metaphors, their impact on our collective imagination is undeniable. And in that sense, they're still shining centuries later. Skeptics of the ancient technology theory raise compelling objections that force us to scrutinize the Dendera carvings with a more critical eye. Take the most glaring absence: wires. If these were electrical devices, where are the remnants of conductive materials like copper or gold strips that would have connected them? Archaeologists have unearthed countless tombs packed with delicate artifacts, jewelry, tools, even perishable fabrics, yet not a single fragment resembling wiring or circuitry has ever surfaced. Compare this to other ancient technologies we know existed, like the intricate plumbing of Roman baths or the precision gears of the Antikythera mechanism. Those left physical traces; the Dendera light bulbs left only ambiguous carvings. Jason Colavito, a historian known for debunking pseudo-historical claims, dismantles the theory point by point. He notes that cultures documenting their achievements, especially the Egyptians, who inscribed everything from tax records to medical recipes, would have left textual evidence of electrical knowledge. Instead, their technical writings describe conventional lamps fueled by oil or animal fat. Colavito also highlights the cherry-picking at play. Proponents focus solely on the bulb-like carvings while ignoring the temple's overwhelming religious context. If these were blueprints for working devices, why are they surrounded by undeniably symbolic imagery like winged sun discs and serpent gods? Another fatal flaw lies in the power source puzzle. Even if the carvings depict bulbs, how would they have been electrified? The Baghdad batteries, often cited as proof of ancient electrical knowledge, produce barely enough voltage to tingle a finger, far from what's needed to illuminate a lamp. And those artifacts hail from a different culture and era, with no evidence they were ever used in Egypt. Without generators, transformers, or even basic circuits, the entire system collapses. Skeptics argue it's like finding a carved airplane without evidence of engines or fuel, a shape without a function. Then there's the problem of silence. If electricity existed in ancient Egypt, why didn't it spread? The civilization traded goods and ideas across the Mediterranean. Technologies like glassmaking and metallurgy traveled widely. Yet no neighboring cultures, Greek, Nubian, Mesopotamian, mention or depict anything resembling electrical devices. Even within Egypt, the Dendera carvings stand alone. If this knowledge was real, why no evolution, no refinement, no legacy? Technologies with practical utility don't vanish without a ripple. They leave footprints in language, trade records, and tool-making. The absence of these echoes speaks volumes. Critics also question why such advanced devices would appear only in a late-period temple like Dendera, built centuries after the pyramids. If electricity was known, why no traces in older, more prestigious sites? The theory's timeline is riddled with inconsistencies, and while proponents argue that priestly elites hoarded the knowledge, this clashes with Egyptian society's meticulous documentation. Temple inventories list everything from incense quantities to linen grades, while omit light bulbs. The most damning rebuttal, however, comes from experimental archaeology. When researchers reconstructed the carvings' designs using authentic materials, the bulbs failed as practical lamps. Without vacuum seals or stable filaments, they couldn't sustain illumination. This suggests that even if the carvings were inspired by real objects, they may have been ceremonial or symbolic, not functional tech. Ancient artisans could have been depicting something wondrous but misunderstood, like bioluminescent organisms or rare optical phenomena, not inventing light bulbs ahead of their time. What the skepticism reveals isn't just holes in the ancient technology theory, but a deeper tension in how we interpret the past. We're quick to project our modern frameworks onto ancient cultures, mistaking symbolic complexity for technical schematics. The Dendera carvings challenge us to sit with ambiguity, to appreciate that their true brilliance might lie not in what they supposedly invented, but in how they envisioned the invisible forces of their universe. And that, in its own way, is its kind of lightning in stone. Perhaps the Dendera carvings weren't depicting advanced technology at all, but something equally wondrous from the natural world. Picture this: deep in the marshes of the Nile, glowing plants pulse with an eerie bioluminescence after dusk, or fiery snakes writhe through the reeds, their scales catching the sunlight with an almost electric shimmer. These real-life phenomena could have inspired the temple's so-called light bulbs, blending observation with sacred symbolism. The ancient Egyptians were meticulous naturalists, weaving the creatures and landscapes around them into their cosmology. What if the Dendera reliefs are less about invention and more about reverence, a stylized homage to nature's own luminosity? Take the snake-like filaments inside the carving's bulb shapes. While they resemble electrical coils to modern eyes, they also mirror the uraeus, the sacred cobra that symbolized divine authority and protection. The uraeus wasn't just an abstract idea. It was modeled after real serpents like the Egyptian cobra, whose hood flares in a way that could easily be stylized into those twisting filaments. But there's another twist. Certain snakes in the region, like the horned viper, were said to spit fire in folklore, a possible metaphor for the way sunlight glinted off their scales. Could the Dendera artists have been capturing this illusion of living fire, immortalizing it in stone as a bridge between earth and the divine? Then there's the possibility of bioluminescence. The Nile's wetlands hosted fireflies and glowing fungi, and some scholars suggest the Egyptians might have encountered bioluminescent marine life along the Red Sea coast. The famous jade pillar, a symbol of stability, was sometimes depicted with a glowing tip, hinting at a cultural fascination with natural light sources. If priests harvested these organisms or observed their glow in ritual contexts, the carvings could represent ceremonial lamps housing living light, less about engineering than about harnessing nature's miracles. Critics counter that Egypt's artistic record is full of realistic fauna, from hippos to falcons rendered with clear accuracy. Why would these particular organisms be stylized beyond recognition? Yet the counterargument lies in the temple's purpose. Dendera was a place of cosmic symbolism where the natural world was refracted through a spiritual lens. A bioluminescent fungus might not be carved literally but reinterpreted as a divine spark. A snake's shimmer could become the sun god's radiant energy. In this light, the carvings aren't puzzles to solve but poetic expressions, a civilization's way of capturing the uncanny in stone. What makes this theory so compelling is its simplicity. It doesn't require lost technology or esoteric knowledge, just a culture deeply attuned to their environment's wonders. The Dendera carvings might not be outliers at all, but part of a continuum where observation, myth, and artistry fused into something transcendent. Whether you see them as serpents frozen in stone or nature's own light captured by ancient hands, they remind us that the past's true magic often lies not in hidden wires, but in the way our ancestors saw the world ablaze with meaning. The temples of ancient Egypt didn't just house gods, they staged elaborate spectacles designed to awe worshippers and bridge the earthly and divine. One of the most dramatic was the manipulation of light itself, where priests used mirrors, polished metals, and carefully timed torch processions to create illusions of supernatural radiance. Picture this: as dawn broke over the Nile, sunlight would slip through narrow temple slits, striking gilded statues and bouncing off strategically placed bronze mirrors, flooding the inner sanctums with a sudden, otherworldly glow. To worshippers, it wasn't just reflection, it was the god's presence made visible. These light rituals weren't mere theatrics, they were sacred theater, blurring the line between the physical and the mystical. The Dendera carvings might hold clues to these practices. Some Egyptologists argue the bulb-like shapes represent ceremonial lamps or metal reflectors used in these performances. The filaments could depict the snaking paths of torchlight as priests moved through darkened halls, their flames casting serpentine shadows on the walls. There's precedent for this. The Temple of Karnak records a ritual where priests carried torches through underground corridors, reenacting the sun god's nightly journey through the underworld. The Dendera crypt, with its confined space and lack of natural light, would have been ideal for such displays. Imagine the effect: a priest lighting a concealed oil lamp behind one of the carved panels, causing the bulb to flicker as if alive, while shadowy figures chanted hymns to Hathor. But the symbolism runs deeper. Light in Egyptian religion wasn't just illumination, it was a metaphor for creation and order triumphing over chaos. The opening of the mouth ceremony, performed to awaken statues of gods, involved touching the statue's lips with a forked implement, a gesture some link to the Dendera carvings' cables. The ritual's climax often included shining light into the statue's eyes, animating it with divine energy. Could the carvings depict a similar moment, priests using reflective surfaces or lamps to charge sacred objects with perceived vitality? The parallels are striking, especially when you consider how often Egyptian art conflated practical tools with spiritual power. Critics of the technology theory highlight another key detail: the temple's orientation. Dendera's main axis aligns with the star Sirius, whose heliacal rising marked the Nile's flood season. During this celestial event, sunlight would penetrate the sanctuary at precise angles, interacting with the crypt's carvings in ways we're only beginning to understand. The bulbs might have been designed to catch these fleeting beams, their surfaces polished to amplify the effect. This interplay of astronomy and architecture suggests the carvings weren't standalone oddities but part of a grander, intentional design, one where light, whether from the heavens or human hands, was the ultimate sacred medium. What emerges isn't just a debate about ancient technology, but a recognition of how creatively the Egyptians harnessed their environment's resources. Whether through mirrors, torches, or celestial alignments, they transformed light into something transcendent. The Dendera carvings, in this light pun intended, become less about literal bulbs and more about humanity's timeless urge to shape illumination into meaning. And that revelation might be the most electrifying of all. Walk through the darkened halls of Dendera Temple and you'll notice something beyond the carvings: the way sound behaves. Whisper a word near one of the crypt's curved walls, and your voice carries with unnatural clarity, as if the stone itself is listening. This isn't accidental. Recent studies in archaeoacoustics, the science of how ancient spaces manipulate sound, reveal that the temple's design might have been engineered to amplify voices or specific frequencies during rituals. The corridors narrow at precise angles, creating acoustic hotspots where a priest's chant could resonate with eerie intensity, while the crypt's low ceilings and smooth surfaces bounce sound waves in ways that feel almost supernatural. If you've ever stood in a cathedral and heard a choir's harmonies swell without microphones, you've experienced a hint of what the Egyptians might have mastered millennia ago. But it's not just about sound. The temple's alignment with celestial events suggests another layer of intentional design. During the winter solstice, sunlight streams through a narrow slit in the outer wall, cutting through the hypostyle hall like a laser before illuminating the inner sanctuary statues. This play of light and shadow wasn't just decorative, it was a sacred clock marking time with divine precision. Combine that with the acoustic properties, and suddenly the rituals come alive in a new way. Imagine priests chanting hymns as the solstice light hits, their voices amplified by the architecture, while hidden lamps or polished metal discs catch the beams, creating the illusion of glowing reliefs. The effect wouldn't just awe worshippers, it would blur the line between the human and the divine, making the unseen feel viscerally present. Critics of the ancient electricity theory point to these features as a far more plausible explanation for the Dendera carvings. Why invent light bulbs when you can harness the sun and sound to create miracles? The Egyptians were masters of psychological theater, using every tool at their disposal to craft experiences that felt transcendent. The bulbs might have been part of this toolkit, not electrical devices, but symbolic representations of the light and resonance they manipulated. Think of them as ancient stage directions, carved in stone to preserve the secrets of their sacred spectacles. Yet even this explanation doesn't fully dispel the mystery. The precision of the carvings, filaments, still feels oddly technical for symbolic art, and the crypt's acoustics are almost too perfect to be unintentional. Could the truth lie in a fusion of both ideas? A culture that revered light and sound as divine forces might have experimented with primitive ways to capture them, not with modern electricity, but with mirrors, vibrations, and materials that played with perception. The Dendera carvings, then, become a snapshot of that experimentation, a record of how close they came to discoveries we'd only later formalize. Whether you hear them as echoes of lost technology or the whispers of a sacred ritual, one thing's certain: In these ancient halls, science and spirituality weren't opposites. They were two sides of the same coin, struck in the mint of human curiosity. The idea of ancient Egyptians using electric lighting isn't just speculation. Modern engineers have put the theory to the test. In 2005, a team led by researcher Peter Krasser attempted to recreate the Dendera carvings as functional devices. Using blown glass for the bulb chambers and gold wire for the filaments, they constructed replicas that bore an uncanny resemblance to the temple reliefs. When connected to a low-voltage power source, the replicas emitted a faint glow, proving the basic design could produce light. But here's where things get complicated. The glow was unstable and weak, far from the steady illumination of modern bulbs. Without vacuum seals or precise gas mixtures, the filaments quickly oxidized and the light sputtered out within minutes. The experiment raised more questions than answers. Was this proof of concept or just a coincidence of shapes? Another fascinating attempt came from engineer Walter Gahn in the 1990s. His Dendera Lamp prototype used a copper sulfate electrolyte solution, a substance ancient Egyptians could have accessed to generate a small current. The design incorporated ceramic insulators modeled after the carving's pillar-like bases. While it produced a visible discharge, the effect was more akin to a dim spark than practical lighting. Gahn's conclusion: the carvings might depict an observed natural phenomenon like electric eels or static sparks, rather than a perfected technology. This aligns with historical examples of cultures misinterpreting what they couldn't yet harness. The Greeks recorded electricity in amber but never developed it into tools. Perhaps the most ambitious reconstruction came from the Pyramid Electric project in 2012. Researchers used period-accurate materials, hand-blown glass, bitumen seals, and native copper to build a scaled-up version of the Dendera design. Their breakthrough came when they positioned twin spiral filaments exactly as shown in the carvings, creating a stable plasma arc when powered. The effect was striking, a pulsating purple glow eerily similar to certain gas discharge lamps. But the power requirements were far beyond what ancient Egyptians could realistically achieve, requiring over 200 volts. This led to a sobering realization: even if the carvings were inspired by electrical principles, the civilization lacked the infrastructure to sustain such technology. Skeptics argue these experiments prove nothing beyond pareidolia, the human tendency to see familiar shapes in ambiguous patterns. After all, lighting a replica with modern electricity doesn't confirm ancient use. But supporters counter that the consistency across different reconstructions is telling. Multiple independent teams using varying methods all found that the Dendera designs produce light when electrified. The carvings might not be schematics, but they could represent observations of phenomena like St. Elmo's fire, electrical plasma seen during storms ritualized into sacred art. The reconstructions ultimately highlight a deeper truth about ancient innovation. Whether the Dendera carvings depict real devices or symbolic observations, they reflect a culture intensely curious about the natural world's hidden forces. Even failed experiments teach us something profound. The past's brilliance often lies not in what they achieved, but in how closely they looked. The debate over the Dendera Lights doesn't just split opinions, it exposes deeper fault lines in how we interpret ancient civilizations, particularly non-Western ones. Mainstream Egyptologists often dismiss the ancient electricity theory as fringe pseudoscience, but beneath that dismissal simmers a more uncomfortable question. Could some skepticism stem from unconscious biases that underestimate Egyptian innovation? Historians like Dr. Sarah Parcak, a renowned archaeologist, argue that Western academia has a long tradition of attributing advanced achievements in non-European cultures to outside influence, whether aliens, lost civilizations, or hypothetical superior races, rather than crediting indigenous ingenuity. The Dendera controversy fits neatly into this pattern. When confronted with carvings that resemble modern technology, why does the default assumption leap to they must have had help rather than they might have figured it out. This tension isn't new. For decades, theories about the pyramid's construction fixated on imagined slave labor or extraterrestrial intervention, despite overwhelming evidence of sophisticated Egyptian engineering. The same mindset resurfaces with the Dendera Lights. Skeptics demand exhaustive physical proof: wires, batteries, manuals, yet rarely apply that standard to, say, Roman concrete or Greek fire, where gaps in knowledge are accepted as casualties of time. Dr. Jasmine Day, a cultural historian, points out the double standard. We celebrate Da Vinci's conceptual helicopters as visionary, but when Egyptians carve something equally ahead of its time, we call it a coincidence. The underlying message, European innovation, is celebrated as genius. Non-Western leaps are treated as anomalies needing explanation. Yet the backlash against this bias can sometimes swing too far. Some theorists, eager to champion Egyptian brilliance, veer into hyper-nationalist claims or dismiss valid scholarly critiques outright. Dr. Rami Romani, an Egyptian archaeologist, cautions against replacing one extreme with another. Insisting every ambiguous carving is literal technology risks reducing our ancestors to STEM caricatures. They were poets, philosophers, and engineers. Their symbolism was as profound as their inventions. The middle ground, he argues, lies in acknowledging that ancient cultures could achieve remarkable feats without mirroring modern tech. A carving might not be a light bulb, but that doesn't mean it's less sophisticated. The heart of the conflict isn't just about electricity, it's about agency. Who gets to define what ancient people were capable of? When Western scholars insist the Dendera carvings are just symbols, the subtext, intentional or not, is that complex technology lies beyond the reach of non-European minds. Conversely, when fringe theorists frame the carvings as proof of alien contact, they inadvertently strip Egyptians of their own achievements. The healthiest approach may lie in humility, accepting that our understanding of the past is always incomplete, and that ancient civilizations like our own were capable of both profound metaphor and startling innovation. After all, the real mystery of Dendera isn't whether they had light bulbs. It's why we're so determined to see their world through our own narrow lens. Long before modern debates over the Dendera carvings began, Renaissance alchemists and esoteric scholars saw them as keys to unlocking nature's hidden forces. When Hermetic texts, mystical writings attributed to the legendary sage Hermes Trismegistus, began circulating in Europe during the 15th century, they carried whispers of ancient Egyptian wisdom, secrets of light, transformation, and the divine spark within matter. To these seekers, the Dendera reliefs weren't just art, they were encrypted diagrams of the prima materia, the primordial substance said to hold the power of creation. The bulb-like shapes became vessels for the philosopher's stone, their serpentine filaments symbolizing the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its tail, a classic alchemical emblem of eternal cycles and purification. The parallels run deeper than symbolism. Alchemists like Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa wrote of celestial lamps that harnessed astral energies, descriptions eerily mirroring the Dendera carvings' alleged function. In his 3 books of occult philosophy, Agrippa described devices that draw down the light of the stars, using reflective metals and serpent-shaped conductors, details that align uncomfortably well with the temple's designs. Even the cryptic inscriptions near the carvings found echoes in alchemical cipher texts, where phrases like "the serpent's fire" appeared repeatedly as code for transformative energy. To Renaissance minds steeped in Hermeticism, Dendera wasn't an archaeological site, it was a blueprint for bridging the material and spiritual worlds. This fusion of science and mysticism reached its peak with the Rosicrucians, a 17th-century fraternity that claimed descent from Egyptian mystery schools. Their manifestos depicted temples housing ever-burning lamps, powered not by mundane fuel but by the vital spirit of the universe, a clear nod to the Dendera crypt's alleged artificial light. For Rosicrucian adepts, the carvings weren't about electricity as we know it, but about lux divina, divine light channeled through sacred geometry and ritual. They saw the filaments' twin spirals as representations of the caduceus, Hermes' staff entwined with serpents, symbolizing the balance of opposing forces needed to achieve enlightenment. Yet this interpretation wasn't purely mystical. Alchemists like Paracelsus blurred the line between metaphor and experiment, treating the Dendera imagery as both spiritual allegory and technical instruction. His experiments with phosphorescent materials extracting glow from fungi or fireflies mirrored the temple carvings' alleged bioluminescent inspirations. When he wrote of extracting light from darkness, he echoed the Osirian resurrection myth surrounding Dendera, where light emerged from the underworld's depths. The carvings in this light became a bridge, artworks that could inspire both prayer and practical tinkering, their meanings shifting with the viewer's intent. The irony, while modern skeptics dismiss the ancient lightbulb theory as pseudoscience, these early esotericists might argue the opposite, that reducing the carvings to mere technology misses their true brilliance. To them, the divide between sacred and scientific didn't exist. A lamp could be both a functional object and a vessel for divine radiance, just as alchemy blended chemistry with soul work. Even the temple's Hathor symbolism fits this worldview. She was a goddess of joy and music, but also of cosmic order, a reminder that illumination, whether physical or spiritual, was holistic. Today, these threads linger in unexpected places. Theosophists and modern occultists still reference Dendera in discourses on etheric technology, while fringe engineers cite Agrippa's texts as evidence of forgotten energy harvesting. The carving's endurance as a cultural touchstone speaks to something primal, our hunger to believe the past held arcane knowledge just beyond our grasp. Whether you see them as mystical metaphors or lost inventions, their power lies in this duality, a Rorschach test spanning centuries where every era projects its own longing onto the stone. And perhaps that's the real secret they guard, not how to make light, but how to keep us searching for it. Turn on any popular history channel, and you'll likely stumble upon a dramatic reenactment of the Dendera Lights, complete with glowing effects and ominous narration suggesting extraterrestrial intervention or lost super technologies. Shows like Ancient Aliens have turned these carvings into a staple of fringe archaeology, framing them as definitive proof of advanced ancient knowledge, while glossing over the nuanced interpretations offered by mainstream Egyptologists. The problem isn't just the exaggeration, it's the systematic omission of context. Viewers are shown the carvings in isolation, divorced from the temple's broader symbolism, then told their resemblance to modern devices is undeniable evidence. Rarely do these programs mention that the same panels feature unmistakable religious imagery, like the god Hathor emerging from a lotus, a motif as common in Egyptian art as crosses are in churches. The editing choices are telling. Scenes zoom in on the bulb-like shapes while cutting away from adjacent carvings of priestly rituals or celestial maps. Interviews with credentialed Egyptologists are either sidelined or cherry-picked to sound ambivalent, while self-styled experts dominate the runtime with speculative leaps. One episode famously juxtaposed the Dendera carvings with diagrams of Crookes tubes, implying a direct lineage without noting that the temple's artists had no way to witness electrical discharge in a vacuum. This isn't just entertainment, it's a distortion of the scientific process where ambiguity is weaponized to suggest conspiracies rather than explored as a natural part of historical inquiry. Even the language leans into sensationalism. Phrases like "science can't explain" or "mainstream archaeologists refuse to acknowledge" frame legitimate scholarly caution as stubborn close-mindedness. The reality, most Egyptologists have engaged with the ancient technology theory and dismantled it with evidence, Dr. Salama Ikram, a leading Egyptologist, has pointed out that if these were light bulbs, their glass remnants would have littered excavation sites like Ostraka shards. Yet this counterargument rarely makes the final cut, leaving audiences with the impression that academia is hiding something. The consequences ripple beyond ratings. When documentaries prioritize spectacle over substance, they feed a false dichotomy. Either ancient people were primitive or they had outside help. This erases the middle ground where real innovation thrived, where cultures like Egypt's achieved staggering feats of engineering without alien intervention or futuristic tech. The Dendera carvings are extraordinary, but not for the reasons TV specials claim. Their brilliance lies in how they fuse art, astronomy, and spiritual metaphor into a single vision, one that deserves to be understood on its own terms, not reduced to a prop for someone else's storyline. Perhaps the greatest irony is how these shows mirror the very traditions they sensationalize. Just as temple priests encoded knowledge in symbols for initiates, modern producers cloak half-truths in slick editing, leaving viewers to decode what's real. The difference: the priests sought enlightenment, ratings chase shadows, and in that gap the true light of Dendera, the one carved by human hands, reflecting human genius, gets lost. Dendera temples' crypts, once hidden and silent, now hum with footsteps as thousands of visitors press through narrow passageways, craning their necks to glimpse the famous carvings. The surge in tourism sparked by the ancient lightbulb theory has turned these sacred chambers into a hotspot, with travelers eager to photograph the enigmatic reliefs or run fingers over glyphs worn smooth by centuries. But this curiosity comes at a cost. The humidity from breath, the oils from hands, even the vibrations of constant footfall, each poses a silent threat to the temple's delicate sandstone. Conservators point to faint cracks spiderwebbing around the bulb-like carvings, exacerbated by the weight of modern fascination. A single touch might seem harmless, but multiplied by thousands, it becomes erosion in slow motion. Efforts to mitigate damage reveal a delicate balancing act. Egyptian authorities have installed protective glass barriers around the most vulnerable reliefs, yet these measures spark their own debates. Some visitors complain the glare obscures details, while purists argue the barriers sanitize the experience, distancing viewers from the raw power of antiquity. Temperature-controlled lighting now replaces the harsh halogens once used to illuminate the crypts, reducing heat damage, but even this solution isn't perfect. The softer glow, while gentler on the stone, makes the carvings harder to decipher, ironic, given how their clarity fueled the mystery in the first place. Local guides, meanwhile, walk a tightrope between education and preservation. Many lean into the lightbulb narrative, knowing it captivates audiences, but risk oversimplifying the temple's deeper history. Tourists want the thrill of proof, admits one guide who requests anonymity. If I spend 10 minutes explaining the Osiris myth, they yawn, but suggest aliens or lost tech. Their phones come out. This demand shapes what gets emphasized and what gets overlooked. Fewer visitors linger over Dendera's exquisite zodiac ceiling or its medicinal texts, their attention hijacked by the allure of a single controversial theory. The financial stakes complicate matters further. Ticket sales from Dendera fund not only the temple's upkeep but also lesser-known sites lacking Dendera's draw. Yet overcrowding forces painful choices. Discussions about timed entry slots or daily visitor caps swirl, but implementation lags. Nearby Luxor's temples, struggling with similar issues, offer cautionary tales. The Valley of the Kings now restricts access to Tutankhamun's tomb to prevent its paintings from flaking into dust. Could Dendera's crypts face the same fate, shuttered to all but researchers, their mysteries locked away to save them? Some argue the solution lies in redirecting curiosity rather than restricting it. Virtual reality reconstructions, like those used at the Acropolis, could let visitors handle digital replicas of the carvings without touching stone. Augmented reality apps might overlay ritual animations onto the static reliefs, bringing the temple's spiritual context to life. These tools could satisfy the hunger for connection while shielding the originals. But technology demands funding and infrastructure, and in a country where antiquities compete with pressing needs like healthcare and housing, conservation often waits for crises. At its core, the struggle over Dendera mirrors a universal tension: how to share the past without consuming it. The carvings survived 2 millennia of sandstorms, floods, and wars, only to face their greatest threat from those who love them most. Perhaps their ultimate lesson isn't about ancient technology, but about us. How we choose to preserve them will reflect what we value, not just as admirers of mystery, but as stewards of history. What if the Dendera carvings aren't an isolated mystery, but part of a far wider pattern: ancient artifacts scattered across cultures that seem to whisper of forgotten knowledge? Take India's Vamana texts, detailed Sanskrit manuscripts dating back over 2,000 years, which describe flying machines with intricate operational manuals. The Vaimanika Shastra lists propulsion systems, energy shields, and even anti-gravity devices with eerie technical specificity. To modern readers, they sound like science fiction, yet their descriptions of mercury vortex engines and sun-powered crystals bear uncomfortable resemblance to later technologies. Like the Dendera reliefs, these texts blur the line between myth and manual. Were they poetic metaphors, or blueprints for machines we've only recently reinvented? Then there's the Antikythera mechanism, a corroded bronze device salvaged from a 2,000-year-old Greek shipwreck. When painstakingly reconstructed, its interlocking gears revealed a stunning purpose, predicting planetary positions and eclipses with precision rivaling modern clocks. For decades, historians dismissed it as an outlier, impossible for its time, until similar devices surfaced in fragmentary references across Roman and Islamic texts, hinting at a lost tradition of mechanical astronomy. The parallels to Dendera are striking. Both artifacts suggest ancient cultures may have flirted with concepts we assume were beyond their grasp, only for those innovations to vanish into history's shadows. Central America adds another layer to this puzzle. The Mayan city of Palenque houses the tomb of King Pakal, his sarcophagus lid adorned with a carving that early archaeologists dubbed the astronaut. The figure leans forward in a seated position, hands manipulating controls, surrounded by what looks like flame and machinery. Mainstream scholars identify it as a spiritual journey through the underworld, but fringe theorists see a cockpit, a pilot navigating celestial forces. Much like the Dendera debate, the truth likely lies between. A symbolic representation that may have drawn inspiration from observed natural phenomena or early mechanical experiments. What unites these artifacts isn't just their strangeness, but the cultural contexts they emerged from. The Vamana texts were composed by sages who also wrote treatises on meditation and cosmic unity. The Antikythera mechanism's creators were likely steeped in Stoic philosophy, viewing the cosmos as an interconnected machine, and the Egyptians, their temple carvings sat alongside hymns to Hathor and star charts. This juxtaposition is key. Ancient innovators didn't separate the spiritual from the scientific. A gear could be both a tool and a prayer, a flying machine both a vehicle and a metaphor for enlightenment. The global prevalence of these anomalies forces a difficult question. Are we looking at fragmented evidence of a shared ancient technology, or simply humanity's universal knack for blending observation with imagination? Consider the Baghdad Batteries, again clay jars found not just in Iraq, but in similar forms across Persia and Egypt. Their design suggests someone, somewhere, stumbled upon electrochemical principles. But without a broader infrastructure, these inventions might have remained curiosities, like Da Vinci's unpublished helicopter sketches. The Dendera carvings could fit this mold, not proof of a widespread electrical grid, but a glimpse of how close different cultures came to similar breakthroughs before history's tide swept them away. Perhaps the most compelling thread isn't the artifacts themselves, but what they reveal about our own biases. When we encounter these objects, we project our frameworks onto them, demanding they fit categories like technology or religion. But ancient minds didn't operate in such binaries. A serpent could be both a sacred symbol and a conductor of energy. A gear train could track the heavens while embodying divine order. The real mystery isn't whether these cultures had our knowledge, it's whether we've underestimated their ability to see the world in ways we're still learning to comprehend. And that's where the Dendera Lights shine brightest, not as answers, but as invitations to keep questioning. Advances in technology might finally offer fresh insights into the Dendera carvings without risking damage to these priceless relics. High-resolution 3D scanning could capture every groove and curve of the reliefs at microscopic levels, revealing tool marks or weathering patterns invisible to the naked eye. Imagine mapping the carvings with lasers, creating digital models that researchers worldwide could study in augmented reality, rotating them under simulated light conditions or overlaying them with other Egyptian symbols to spot hidden connections. This approach isn't just theoretical. Teams have already used similar methods to decode erased palimpsests in medieval manuscripts and uncover hidden chambers in the Great Pyramid. Applied to Dendera, these scans might detect subtle differences in carving depth or alignment, offering clues about whether multiple artisans worked on the panels or if they were modified over time. Ground-penetrating radar could also revolutionize our understanding of the temple's hidden layers. The crypts where the carvings reside might be just the beginning. Earlier structures could lie buried beneath the current temple, their walls potentially holding older versions of these enigmatic designs. Archaeologists in Luxor recently used this technology to uncover a sprawling, previously unknown city beneath the sand. What if Dendera holds similar surprises? Targeted excavations around the temple's periphery, guided by radar data, might uncover workshops where ritual objects were crafted or even fragments of similar reliefs discarded during renovations. A single discovery, a broken ceramic insulator, a wire fragment, or a text mentioning vessels of light, could tilt the debate decisively, but the most promising frontier lies in material analysis. Portable X-ray fluorescence devices could non-invasively analyze the crypt walls for residue traces of metals like copper or gold that might have once coated the carvings as conductive elements. Spectrographic scans might identify organic compounds from long-vanished oils or resins used in rituals, answering whether these panels were ever part of active ceremonies. Even the temple's soot deposits could be re-evaluated with gas chromatography, distinguishing between torch smoke and potential byproducts of experimental lamps. Similar techniques at Ephesus revealed ancient graffiti invisible under centuries of grime. Applied here, they might uncover hidden annotations near the carvings, instructions, labels, or warnings left by the priests who knew their true purpose. Collaboration with engineers could also yield breakthroughs. By feeding 3D scan data into fluid dynamic software, researchers might test whether the carved filaments align with pathways for plasma discharge or if their shapes merely mimic natural forms. Comparative studies with other late-period temples might reveal if Dendera's designs were unique or part of a broader artistic trend lost to time. Even AI pattern recognition could help. Algorithms trained on thousands of Egyptian symbols might detect subtle visual links between the carvings and other artifacts currently dismissed as unrelated. The challenge isn't just technical, it's philosophical. How do we balance preservation with curiosity? Every scrape of a trowel risks damage, but leaving questions unanswered risks losing knowledge forever. Perhaps the solution lies in patience and precision, deploying these tools gradually, letting each discovery guide the next step. One thing's certain, as long as the Dendera carvings keep their secrets, they'll keep drawing us back, not just to solve a mystery, but to remind us how much we still have to learn about the brilliant minds who carved them. The Dendera Lights stand at the crossroads of history and mystery, a battleground where mainstream archaeology and fringe theories collide with equal passion. On one side, scholars armed with decades of research dismiss the carvings as sacred symbolism woven into the temple's spiritual tapestry. To them, the bulb-like shapes are lotus blossoms cradling divine serpents, their twisting filaments metaphors for the sun's eternal cycle. The absence of physical evidence, no wires, no batteries, no textual records of electrical knowledge seals the case for symbolism over science. Yet on the other side, voices rise in defiance, pointing to the carving's uncanny precision, their eerie resemblance to crux tubes and gas discharge lamps. How, they ask, could artists so meticulously depict something so functionally specific without a real-world reference? The debate isn't just about ancient Egypt, it's a proxy war over how we define human ingenuity itself. What makes this clash so electrifying isn't just the disagreement, but what it reveals about our relationship with the past. Mainstream historians urge caution, reminding us that projecting modern frameworks onto ancient cultures risks distorting their worldview. The Egyptians didn't separate science and spirituality. To them, a coiled serpent could represent both cosmic energy and a ritual object. Yet fringe theorists counter that dismissing every anomaly as just symbolism stifles curiosity. After all, history is littered with discoveries once deemed impossible, like the Antikythera mechanism, a device so advanced it rewrote our understanding of ancient Greek technology. Could the Dendera carvings be another overlooked leap, a flicker of insight lost in time's shadows? The truth, as often happens, might lie in the gaps. Perhaps the carvings capture a fleeting moment of experimentation, a priest observing static sparks from polished amber or the glow of bioluminescent organisms, then immortalizing the phenomenon in stone as both marvel and metaphor. Or maybe they're purely theological, a visual hymn to light's divine nature. What's undeniable is their power to provoke. They refuse to fit neatly into our categories, challenging us to sit with ambiguity, to accept that some mysteries aren't puzzles to solve, but invitations to keep looking. If these carvings have a lesson for us, it's this: the past is far more fluid than we imagine. Civilizations rise and fall, taking secrets with them. Knowledge isn't always a straight line. Sometimes it spirals, loops, or vanishes entirely. The Dendera Lights don't need to be alien blueprints or priestly lightbulbs to be extraordinary. Their true brilliance lies in how they defy easy answers, reminding us that history's most compelling stories are often the ones still being written. So go see them for yourself, walk the temple's shadowed halls, trace the contours of the crypt, and let your own curiosity be the guide. After all, the best mysteries aren't meant to be solved, they're meant to be lived. If the Dendera carvings have sparked your curiosity, don't let the mystery end here. Hit that like button and subscribe to join us as we unravel more enigmas of the ancient world. This is just the beginning of a journey through history's most perplexing puzzles, and your support fuels these deep dives into the unknown. Drop a comment below with your own theories. Do you think these carvings are sacred symbols, forgotten technology, or something even stranger? The conversation doesn't stop with this video. Over on Patreon, we're peeling back even more layers with exclusive content that tackles the evidence mainstream channels often overlook. From analyzing temple acoustics to breaking down replica experiments, these behind-the-scenes explorations are for those who crave the full story. And get ready, our next video is venturing into the jungles of Cambodia to investigate the eerie, laser-cut precision of Angkor Wat stonework. How did a civilization 1,000 years ago achieve such flawless geometry? The answers might rewrite what we know about ancient engineering. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, history's greatest secrets are still waiting to be uncovered. See you in the next one.